Hey there, fellow YouTubers. Hopefully you can hear me okay because it's kind of a windy day out here. I did a search online for BMW F10 model engine oil cooler gasket replacement, and I didn't find anything that matched exactly, so I thought I'd record the procedure here for future backyard mechanics trying to do the same thing. Alright, so here's what I've done so far. So the first thing I did was remove the air cleaner attachment from here just to create more space in the working zone here. I've also stuffed an absorbent pad underneath the oil cooler here to catch the oil and the coolant as it comes out. There are 3 bolts, one here, and you'll have to loosen this engine cover up just a little bit. I didn't bother taking the hoses off the back because all you need is access to that right there. And then there is another one right under there in the middle for the 3rd bolt. So I'm going to go ahead and remove those now, and then we'll continue. Before I remove those, I just wanted to show you the parts that I've assembled, or the tools that I've assembled to do this job. This is just a plastic rubber scraper with a sharp edge. Put a rag over the top of that and work it through the grooves inside the oil cleaner to help clean out once you remove the old gasket from the inside. Little Scotch-Brite to do the same thing, clean the grooves. I've just cut it into small squares. You're going to need, of course, and I got this down at Napa Auto Parts, an E12. Which is a star socket, outside star socket, basically a reverse Torx, because these heads of these bolts are E12 Torx. And as you can see, the leak is pretty bad. I can see all the signs of the leak on the side of the oil cooler underneath, and up here you can also see the signs of a leak there. And of course the alternator, the belt, the hoses are just splattered with oil everywhere down here from it leaking out. So alright, now to remove those E12 bolts. Okay, I've removed all 3 of the bolts, there, and right about there underneath. The one that was underneath, of course, is quite oil soaked and dirty. As you can see, even on the threads going in. So yeah, this is definitely where it's been leaking the most from. I might also have to change the gasket between the oil filter housing and the engine block itself back there, which would be this bolt here, which is a E10, another bolt back there underneath, and another one under there. So this one down here goes in sideways, and if you do have to remove the housing on this bolt right here, you have to move the housing out about 1/2 inch once you've loosened it in order to get the clearance of this bolt coming this way, to because you can't back it all the way out. It'll bump into the other one without moving the housing forward. So hopefully you don't have to change that gasket too. I'm not changing mine this time. There'll be another video if I do have to change that one, so I haven't assembled all the parts I need to do that yet. I'm going to crack it open and take a look at that filter and back. Okay, so you notice as I popped it open, I've got coolant running out and oil coming out into the pad. So that's expected. Probably should also, let me just set that right there for a minute. And I'm going to open the coolant lid here. The engine is cold, by the way. Let it cool off. You want to have a open system here to not create a vacuum in your coolant system. Okay, now that I've got the engine coolant returned opened up, and we've got most of the fluids have stopped running. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. I bought a pick at Walmart. This comes in a set of 4 over by the sockets and such, but I just use that pick to come in here and grab the old gasket and pry it out. I want to try to not damage any of the sides of the channel. That's probably the most important part. Probably a two-handed job, but I'm holding the phone with one hand. Alright, well, you get the idea. I'm going to pull that out with 2 hands. Brittle. And so as I was attempting to pry that out, it broke. As you can see right there. And I'm just trying to use leverage on the old gasket. And it's going to break again. So, boy, this one really needed to be replaced. It's broken just as I was trying to pull it out. Okay, I'm gonna go back to 2 hands again. Oh yeah, that gasket was super brittle. Broke it in 3 places just trying to pull it out of there. And it's very hard and squished, whereas the new gasket, of course, is very flexible, malleable, rubbery, squishy. This one is very hard, breaks at bend, and definitely due for a replacement. I have about 130,000 miles on the car. Okay, so having used my Scotch-Brite and my little scraping tool here, I put that over the top of a microfiber cloth and ran it through the channels of the place where the new gasket's going to go, and clean that out as best I can. I also used brake cleaner to get the worst of the grease and oil and old residue of the other cloth. I also cleaned this surface here with the Scotch-Brite. Looks like I have a little bit more to do down there in that corner now that I look at it, and right there. So a little bit more scrubbing, get those surfaces nice and flat and even, and then we'll install the new gasket. It's worth mentioning here that this gasket cannot go on backwards. If you try to do it any other way, it won't fit the shape. So now it's just hand pressing it in and resealing the 3 bolts. And when the gasket is pressed in, I wanted to make note of this little nub right here. This pin is an alignment pin for the top middle of your cooler that goes back on. Then you have the 3 bolt holes. Okay, fellow YouTubers, the job's all done. I have reassembled, put those 3 bolts in, torqued them down about 1/8 of a turn beyond tight to get the right torque on the gasket. And then after doing that, then I bled the radiator. There's videos already with procedures on how to do a radiator coolant bleed on a BMW. So just a quick recap, turn on the car with the start stop button, do a accelerator press for 12 seconds, release, and then wait for the stream of water at the top of the coolant reserve tank to stop spraying. And then after that has completed, then you will just recap the reserve tank, and you want to be able to test this if it's leaking additionally after your job is done. So in order to do that, you need to clean up the previous oil spills. And what I used was Super Clean from Walmart in a pre-mixed spray bottle, and just took it to a car wash and sprayed down everything, all the extra oil that had gotten down in the alternator and on the belts and down on the floor of the car and on the hoses, and just sprayed everything with the super clean and then rinsed it off with the high pressure hose, like what you find at a manual car wash. And then once all of that's done, then you can check for leaks after the job has been completed, after your car gets up to temperature, and make sure that everything is working and that you don't have another gasket to fix. Well, here we are on another day. I finished up the previous job on the oil cooler and no leaks. That was good. However, I found another leak on that gasket, that the oil filter housing gasket or stand gasket, just to the left of where it was leaking before. So it looks like I am going to do that second gasket. Looks like they both fail about the same time. So here you can see the paper towel I've shoved down here, and you can see where it's leaking right here on this seam between the engine housing and the oil filter stand housing. So I cleaned up the previous oil that was down here so I could see where it was leaking, and that is right along that seam. So that's what we're working on today. I'm going to remove this whole assembly via this screw, that screw, and one around the back. Pull those out and do the same kind of cleanup that we did on the oil cooler gasket with the Scotch-Brite, and get it all nice and polished, put the new gasket in, and go from there. As to the tools that we'll need, you need an E10 socket. I found these in a kit at O'Reilly's. Not too expensive, about $20 for the whole kit. You need an extension, you need a knuckle joint. That makes it easier to hit that one down there. You need of course, the 3/8" drive. You'll need a 15 and a 16 millimeter to take the bar off. You'll need to take the air cleaner off again, so you'll need a flat tip screwdriver or a socket to pull that one out. I think that's like 8 millimeter. And I think that's about it. Of course, you'll need the Scotch-Brite, you'll need the your mechanics gloves, and of course I've got this little rubber tool that helps with the scraping in the groove where the gasket is, to get it out. A little plastic edging tool. You could use a kitchen knife over a rag or whatever to just guide that in there. And an 8 millimeter ratcheting wrench is really good for the bolt that you have to take off here. If you have a star, of course that will work even better, but an 8 millimeter will fit over it and turn that out. And the ratcheting, of course, helps you get it out a little easier. Okay, yeah, this little nut head is a 1/4 inch, so I just put a 1/4 inch socket on it, zip that out to loosen it up. Okay, so I've got the prep work done, got the absorbent pad in place to catch the oil and coolant fluid as it comes out. So again, we're going to take out this bolt here, this bolt here. The other one is kind of covered by this wire, but you can see it underneath it right there. Note here that the intake manifold is covering that bolt so tight that you cannot get a socket over the head of the Torx bolt. So you do have to remove the intake manifold in order to get there. These other pictures are a closer examination of that. Here you can see the lack of clearance over the top of the bolt. Here you can see on the bottom bolt the lack of clearance there too, that if you move the whole assembly out, you can get to that a little better. So here we can see that the intake manifold is definitely blocking the third bolt that you need to take out. I'm getting a little better view of that here, where you can look in. I've tried an open-end wrench. I've tried just about everything I can to try to get access to that bolt head, but that intake manifold is so close to that, it just blocks any attempt of turning that nut head without taking that off. Lifting the intake manifold about 1/4 of an inch off the top of that allowed me to put a socket over the top of the head and turn it. So that's all you need, but in order to lift the intake manifold 1/4 of an inch, you've got to take off the ECU connections and the heat plate, and then all of the bolts or nut heads on top of the bolts that come out of the engine to mount the intake manifold on there. So that's what this rest of this procedure is about, is getting the plates off. At first I tried to undo the intake manifold bolts without taking the ECU all the way off, thinking that they gave access through the heat plate to all of the bolts, but they only gave access to all but the last one that you need to get out. So you do have to actually remove the heat plate, so you might as well just disconnect everything
of course,
and go from there.
It's advisable to disconnect the ground from the battery, the black cable, to make sure that you don't mess with any of the electronics of the car while you're taking out these 4 bolts out of the plate. Those are T30s, by the way, Torx 30. Now we switch from the T35 from the corners to the T30 to get these underneath Torx on this heat plate, so that you can get to the last remaining bolt on the intake manifold, which is right underneath here. Okay, now that this plate is fully off the top of the intake manifold, I can get to that last little nut, which is right down inside there. By the way, because these are nuts that come off the heads of bolts, it's good to have a little magnetic fissure to get down there in the crevices and pull your nuts out. That just sounded wrong. Okay, now I've taken the intake manifold and pulled it out right to the heads of the bolts, which should create enough clearance now to get a socket on that bolt for the oil filter. I don't remember when I've worked so hard for a single bolt. This is the mid-size one. The long one is here, and the short one is down there, which is also going to be a bitch. Okay, I started that with a just a closed-end 8mm wrench, and then just took it out by hand. And I was worried that it was going to bump up against the backside there, but I was able to get the last thread and pull it out without it bumping, so it'll work. All right, so now it's time for the big reveal. We got all 3 bolts out. It should just pop off. Here we go. Bleeding oil and coolant fluid as promised. And boy, it's a mess down there where it was. I can get my headlight in the right place for you to see it. Alright, we got it all polished up with the Scotch-Brite. Got all the old burnt on gasket pieces all cleaned out of the channel and polished that with Scotch-Brite. And here are some pieces of the last gasket. As you can see, like the other one, it's brittle enough to just break to the touch, and came out in multiple pieces as I was trying to get it out, just fell to bits. So the ones are a lot more flexible, and hopefully will last another 100,000 miles.